We know the date of the first murder. Not approximately, not roughly. We know it happened 430,000 years ago. We know the weapon, and we know exactly where the killer stood when they did it. The victim's skull is sitting in a museum in Madrid right now, and the case has been cold for almost 500,000 years. But here's what nobody tells you about that skull. It doesn't just tell us that ancient humans were violent. It tells us something about violence that most people aren't prepared to hear. Because the story of the first murder isn't really about death. It's about what kind of mind it takes to plan one. Let's start with where it happened. In 1994, archaeologists excavating a cave system in northern Spain called Atapuerca made one of the most significant discoveries in the history of human science. At the bottom of a 14-meter vertical shaft, they found bones, thousands of them, the remains of at least 28 individuals, piled together in the dark at the bottom of a pit that nothing could climb out of. Nobody put them there by accident. The site is called Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, and for years, scientists argued about what it meant. Some thought it was a natural trap in which animals and early humans falling in over centuries. Others thought it was a deliberate burial site, the earliest evidence of ritual disposal of the dead. The bones were too organized, too intentional to be random. Something with a mind had put them there. But it was one skull in particular that changed everything. Skull 17, as researchers catalogued it, belonged to a young adult. The age and sex are hard to determine at this distance, but the condition of the bone is not. When scientists examined the front of the skull, they found two penetrating fractures, both oval-shaped, both in the same location on the frontal bone, just above the left eye socket. Both made by the same object, both delivered with enough force to be immediately fatal. 2 strikes. Same weapon, same spot. In forensic science, that pattern has a name: overkill. The first blow almost certainly killed the individual. The second was unnecessary for any practical purpose. It was something else: emphasis, maybe, certainty, or something our modern brains recognize immediately and instinctively as the signature of intent. The researchers who published their findings in the journal PLOS in 2015 were careful with their language, the way scientists always are. They wrote that the most parsimonious explanation was lethal interpersonal violence. Translated out of academic English, that means one person killed another person on purpose. And their conclusion placed this event at 430,000 years ago, making it the oldest case of homicide in the fossil record. Now here's where it gets strange. The individuals at Sima de los Huesos were not Homo sapiens. Our species didn't exist yet. The bones at Atapuerca belonged to an earlier human relative, possibly a direct ancestor of the Neanderthals, sometimes classified as Homo heidelbergensis, a species that had been walking the earth for hundreds of thousands of years before we showed up, a species that, until recently, most people imagined as something brutish and simple, closer to ape than human. But you don't plan a murder if you're not thinking about the future. You don't deliver a deliberate second strike if you're operating purely on instinct. What happened at the bottom of that pit required something that most people assume is uniquely modern: the ability to decide, in advance, that another individual needed to stop existing. That capacity is older than our species by at least 200,000 years. And Atapuerca isn't alone. The more archaeologists dig, the more they find. A Neanderthal skeleton discovered in Shanidar Cave in Iraq showed a healed wound consistent with a spear strike, survived, then died later, possibly from another act of violence. Fossils from Cro-Magnon sites across Europe show fracture patterns that match blunt force trauma, not falls, not animal attacks. At a site in Kenya called Nairobi, researchers found the remains of 27 individuals dating back 10,000 years, men, women, and children, with fractured skulls, broken hands consistent with defensive wounds, and obsidian blades still embedded in bone. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The picture that emerges is not the one most of us were taught. We grew up with two competing myths about ancient humans. The first is the noble savage, a peaceful creature living in harmony with nature before civilization corrupted everything. The second is the brutal caveman, all rage and no reason, more animal than person. Both of them are wrong. And the skull from Sima de los Huesos is the proof. Because what it shows is neither a creature driven purely by animal instinct nor a peaceful being uncorrupted by the modern world. What it shows is something far more complicated. A mind capable of planning, of intention, of deciding that another life needed to end. That capacity didn't appear with civilization. It didn't arrive with cities or kings or property. It was already there, already built into whoever we were before we became who we are now. But here's the part that tends to stop people. That same capacity, the ability to model another person's existence in your mind, to imagine a future in which they are not present, to execute a plan toward that end, is the same cognitive architecture that allows us to love someone across decades, to grieve, to build relationships that require imagining what another person is thinking and feeling. The ability to plan a murder and the ability to miss someone who is gone are not opposites. They are two outputs of the same underlying system. The Neanderthals buried their dead. There is now significant evidence that they placed flowers on graves, that they cared for injured members of their group who could not have survived without assistance, that they made jewelry and used pigment on their bodies. They also, apparently, killed each other with deliberate intent. Both things are true. They were always both things at once, just like us. So what does the first murder actually tell us? It tells us that violence is not a corruption of human nature. It is not a disease we caught from civilization or a product of modern stress or a failure of the right social conditions. It is ancient. It was in us before we were fully us. But it also tells us that the same mind capable of that violence was capable of ceremony, of care, of carrying a body to a pit and placing it there with purpose rather than leaving it in the open. 430,000 years ago, somewhere in northern Spain, someone made a decision. We don't know why. We don't know what the victim had done, or what the killer was thinking, or whether anyone else was watching. We know 2 oval fractures above a left eye socket, and we know that the person who made them knew exactly what they were doing. The case is cold, the motive is unknown, and the mind that planned it was not so different from the one you're using right now to think about it.